In every town, there's always that one person, someone the whole community trusts without a second thought. Maybe it's the local pastor, a teacher, or the friendly sheriff. Someone whose word is law, whose presence brings a sense of safety. For the people of Willow Creek, that person was Sheriff Daniel Reed, a man with a warm smile and a firm handshake, the kind of man who made you feel like everything was under control. But what happens when the person you trust the most is hiding a secret? A secret that, once uncovered, would shatter the town's peace and leave scars that might never heal. Sheriff Daniel Reed was the kind of man who made people feel safe. Tall, broad-shouldered, and always dressed neatly in his uniform, he carried himself with authority. To the townspeople of Willow Creek, he wasn't just a sheriff. He was a friend, a mentor, and, to some, even a hero. "Morning, Sheriff!" Locals would greet him with cheerful smiles as he walked through the town square. "Morning," Daniel would reply, tipping his hat, his voice steady and reassuring. He knew everyone by name, remembered birthdays, and even lent a helping hand when someone needed it. To outsiders, Willow Creek seemed like a postcard-perfect town. No major crimes, no scandals. Just a peaceful community where trust was never questioned. And Daniel fit right into that picture. He lived on the edge of town in a modest two-story home with his wife Sharon and their two sons, Caleb and Ethan. They seemed like the perfect family, a picture of stability. Sharon taught at the local school, and Caleb was studying criminal justice, hoping to follow in his father's footsteps. But as picture-perfect as Daniel's life appeared, there were cracks beneath the surface, cracks he worked hard to keep hidden. The first whisper of trouble came from an unlikely source, a young journalist named Emily Carter. Emily had moved to Willow Creek a year earlier after losing her big city reporting job. She took a job at the town's small paper, hoping for a fresh start. Most of her work involved covering local events and writing feel-good stories. But one day, something caught her eye, a series of missing persons cases that seemed off. On paper, they looked unrelated, different ages, backgrounds, and no apparent connection. But as Emily dug deeper, a pattern began to form. And all the threads pointed back to one man, Sheriff Daniel Reed. Emily Carter wasn't the type to let things go. It was her curiosity that got her into trouble back in the city. And it was that same curiosity that brought her to Willow Creek's archives, poring over case files late into the night. She wasn't supposed to be there after hours, but she wasn't breaking any rules, at least not technically. The door was unlocked, and no one had told her not to dig through old records. The files weren't organized, just a mess of papers shoved into cabinets, faded missing persons posters, handwritten notes from deputies, search reports. She ran her fingers across the folders, tracing the names. Lila Thompson, Karen Blake, Robert Hayes, all listed as missing, all cases quietly closed. The reports were thin, barely any details, no leads, no follow-ups. Emily's gut told her something wasn't right. As she flipped through the pages, one name stood out, Sheriff Daniel Reed. His name appeared on every report, always the last person to speak with the victims before they disappeared. Coincidence? Maybe. But Emily didn't believe in coincidences. She grabbed a notebook and started connecting the dots. Her corkboard, already crowded with photos and timelines, began to take shape. Strings connected each name to a location, and each location back to one person, Daniel Reed. The next morning, Emily decided to dig a little deeper. She parked outside the sheriff's office, watching from her car as Daniel moved through his morning routine. He greeted his deputies, sipped his coffee, and sat at his desk as if the weight of the world wasn't on his shoulders. But Emily saw something others didn't. He wasn't relaxed. He was controlled, every move deliberate, every smile calculated. When he glanced out the window, their eyes met. For a brief moment, Emily felt her heart race. Did he recognize her? Did he know she was watching? She quickly looked away, pretending to fumble with her phone. When she looked back, he was gone. That evening, Emily knocked on the door of Lila Thompson's parents. Mrs. Thompson opened the door, her face weary. The grief never really left her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. "I'm Emily Carter from the local paper," Emily introduced herself. "I'm looking into Lila's case." Mrs. Thompson's eyes softened, but her guard was still up. "It's been 2 years," she said quietly. "The sheriff did everything he could. There's nothing more to find." Emily swallowed hard. "I don't believe that's true." Mrs. Thompson hesitated for a moment, then opened the door wider. "Come in." As Emily stepped inside, she noticed photos of Lila on the walls. Happy, smiling, full of life. "She was a good girl," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice trembling. "Smart, ambitious. She wanted to make a difference." Emily nodded, taking out her notebook. "Do you remember the last time you saw her?" Mrs. Thompson wiped a tear from her cheek. "The day she disappeared, she said she had a meeting at the sheriff's office." Emily's pen stopped mid-sentence. "With Sheriff Reed?" Mrs. Thompson nodded. "He said he wanted to help her with a job application." She trusted him. Emily's heart pounded. She trusted him. And she never came home. Miley knew she was getting too close to something dangerous. The files, the missing persons, the cryptic mention of a meeting with Sheriff Reed. It all pointed to one thing, but she needed proof. Real, undeniable evidence that Daniel Reed wasn't the man the town believed him to be. Late one night, she sat in her cramped apartment, surrounded by papers and maps, her corkboard overflowing with connections. "What am I missing?" she whispered to herself, tapping her pen against her notebook. Her eyes landed on a map of Willow Creek. She had marked the locations where each missing person was last seen: the gas station on the edge of town, the park near the river, the sheriff's office. But there was one place she hadn't connected yet, a secluded cabin deep in the woods. The cabin was listed under Daniel Reed's name in a public property record she'd pulled weeks ago. Back then, she hadn't thought much of it. Everyone in town knew Daniel liked to get away sometimes, spending weekends alone in the woods to clear his head. But now the cabin felt more like a hiding place than a retreat. The next morning, Emily packed her gear, her camera, notebook, and voice recorder, and made the drive to the woods. The deeper she went, the quieter it became. No passing cars, no birds, just the crunch of leaves beneath her boots and the rustle of trees in the wind. When the cabin came into view, her stomach twisted. It was smaller than she expected, weathered and isolated, a place no one would stumble upon by accident. She approached cautiously, her heart pounding with each step. The windows were dark, but the door wasn't locked. Why would it be? No one was supposed to be out here. Inside, the air was stale. Dust covered the furniture and a single lantern sat on the table, its glass smudged with fingerprints. Emily walked slowly, her camera clicking quietly as she captured every detail. Then her foot caught on something. She looked down and saw the edge of a rug, slightly askew. She knelt and lifted it, revealing a wooden trapdoor beneath. Her breath caught in her throat. A hidden compartment. With trembling hands, she pulled the door open, revealing a shallow space below. Inside, she found a box, old, rusted, and locked. Emily grabbed a small pry bar from her bag and forced it open. The lid creaked, revealing what she feared and hoped she would find. Inside were photographs: Lila Thompson, Karen Blake, Robert Hayes, all the missing people. And at the bottom of the box was something more chilling: a journal. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. As Emily flipped through it, she saw detailed notes about each victim, their routines, their vulnerabilities. The final entry was about Lila. She was starting to ask questions, had to stop her before she ruined everything. Emily clapped a hand over her mouth, holding back a sob. He knew, he planned this, and he was still out there. Emily fled the cabin, her mind racing. She had the proof she needed, but now she needed to act fast. She couldn't risk going to the sheriff's office. That was Daniel's territory. Instead, she called Detective Mark Bradley from the State Bureau of Investigation. "Detective Bradley," she said, her voice shaking. "I have evidence. You need to come to Willow Creek." "What kind of evidence?" he asked, his tone skeptical. Proof that Sheriff Reed is involved in the disappearances. I found their pictures. His journal. He's been planning this for years. There was a pause on the other end of the line. We'll be there tomorrow. Emily hung up, but the unease didn't leave her. Daniel would know she was on to him, and he wouldn't let her go that easily. That night, Emily barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind outside her window made her heart race. She knew what Sheriff Daniel Reed was capable of, and now he knew that she knew. By morning, her phone rang. It was Detective Mark Bradley. We're in town, he said, his voice firm. Where do we meet? Emily gave him the address of a diner just outside town. We can't meet in the open, not yet. He's watching everything. At the diner, Emily sat in a corner booth, her back to the wall. She scanned the parking lot through the window, watching for any sign of Daniel's truck. When Detective Bradley arrived, he slid into the seat across from her, his face serious. Show me what you found, he said. Emily placed the photographs and journal on the table, her hands trembling. This is all from his cabin. He kept records of them. Everything. Bradley flipped through the journal, his expression growing darker with each page. This is enough to arrest him, he said, his jaw clenched. We can't wait. Emily nodded. But he's smart. He'll see it coming. Bradley leaned in, lowering his voice. Then we need to catch him off guard. We'll hit his cabin tonight, but we need you to stay out of sight. If he sees you, he'll know. But Daniel already knew. As Emily left the diner, a black SUV followed her at a distance. She didn't notice it at first. Her mind was focused on the evidence, on the plan to bring Daniel down. But when she turned onto a quiet road and the SUV followed, her chest tightened. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Emily's hands shook as she read the message. She knew who it was. Daniel Reed. Hours later, Detective Bradley and his team prepared to raid the cabin. Armed with a warrant and bulletproof vests, they moved in under the cover of darkness. But when they arrived, the cabin was empty. No journal, no photographs, no sign of Daniel. Damn it, Bradley cursed. He's one step ahead. As the team spread out to search the surrounding area, a deputy called out, Over here! Bradley jogged over, his heart pounding. The deputy pointed to the ground, a set of fresh tire tracks leading away from the cabin. He's running, Bradley muttered. We need to find him before he disappears. Meanwhile, Emily sat in her apartment staring at her phone. The text from Daniel haunted her. She thought about calling Detective Bradley, but something stopped her. If Daniel wanted to talk, maybe she could use it to her advantage. Her phone buzzed again. Meet me at the gas station. Come alone. Emily knew it was a trap, but she also knew it was her best chance to end this. When Emily arrived at the gas station, the air was heavy with tension. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. Daniel's truck was parked near the edge of the lot, the engine idling. Emily parked her car and stepped out, her heart pounding in her chest. She kept her hands steady, her mind sharp. This is it. No fear, no backing down. Daniel stepped out of his truck, his sheriff's badge glinting in the dim light. He looked calm, composed, like he always did, but Emily saw the cracks beneath the surface. His eyes were tired, his jaw clenched. Emily, he said, his voice steady, you've been busy. You killed them, Daniel, she said, her voice unwavering. Lila, Karen, Robert, all of them. You used your badge to cover it up. Daniel took a step closer. I did what I had to do. No, Emily said, standing her ground. You did what you wanted to do. You thought you could get away with it. Daniel's calm facade slipped for a moment. His eyes flashed with anger. Do you think anyone will believe you? I've been the sheriff of this town for 15 years. People trust me. Not anymore, Emily said. I've got the evidence, and Detective Bradley is coming for you. Daniel froze. The name hit him like a punch. Emily could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was calculating his next move. You ruined everything, he hissed. No, Daniel, Emily said, her voice sharp. You did! Daniel lunged toward her, but before he could reach her, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Red and blue lights flooded the parking lot as police cars surrounded them. Daniel Reed! Detective Bradley's voice boomed through a megaphone. Put your hands in the air! You're under arrest! Daniel stopped in his tracks, his shoulders slumping. Emily held her breath as deputies moved in, handcuffing Daniel and reading him his rights. As they led him away, Emily locked eyes with him one last time. His mask was gone. The man who had fooled an entire town was now just a broken shell, caught in the light of truth. The news spread like wildfire. By morning, Willow Creek was no longer the quiet town it once was. The headlines were everywhere. Beloved sheriff exposed as serial killer, and the betrayal of Willow Creek. The townspeople were in shock. People who had once greeted Sheriff Daniel Reed with warm smiles now whispered in disbelief. The man they trusted, the man they led into their homes, had betrayed them in the worst way possible. At the town square, a crowd gathered in silence, staring at the posters of the missing. They weren't just names anymore. They were victims. Lila Thompson, Karen Blake, Robert Hayes, and there were more. Names the town hadn't known. Stories that were just beginning to unfold. Emily Carter sat quietly on a bench, watching the town she had come to care for try to process the truth. Detective Mark Bradley approached, sitting beside her. You did good, he said. Emily shook her head. I just did what anyone should have done. I followed the truth. Bradley leaned back, his eyes scanning the square. Most people would have looked away. You didn't. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of everything settling around them. Did he say anything? Emily asked quietly. Bradley nodded. He confessed to everything, the murders, the cover-ups. He even admitted that he planned to kill you. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed made it feel more real. But you stopped him, Bradley said, because you didn't back down. Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. This wasn't just a victory for her. It was justice for the victims. The trial of Daniel Reed was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. His journal, the photographs, the surveillance footage, it all painted a damning picture. There was no plea deal, no chance of parole. The jury took less than an hour to deliver their verdict. Guilty. When the judge handed down his sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, there was no outburst, no gasp, just silence. Daniel sat motionless, his face pale. The man who once stood as the protector of Willow Creek now sat shackled, stripped of his power. As he was led out of the courtroom, he glanced at Emily one last time. She didn't flinch. She met his gaze, unyielding. The predator had lost. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek began to heal. A memorial was held in the town square for the victims. Candles flickered in the night, their soft glow illuminating the faces of those who mourned. Jerome Ellis, Lila's father, stood at the front, holding a framed photo of his daughter. His voice broke as he spoke. Lila was kind, she was smart, and she trusted the wrong person. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. But we won't let her be forgotten. We won't let any of them be forgotten. The crowd murmured in agreement. Emily stood at the back, her heart heavy. She wasn't from Willow Creek, but she felt the loss as deeply as they did. As the crowd dispersed, Jerome approached her. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. Emily nodded. I'm sorry for your loss. I wish I could have done more. Jerome shook his head. You brought us the truth. That's more than anyone else did. Months later, Emily's story about Sheriff Daniel Reed was published. Beneath the Badge, The Dark Secrets of Sheriff Reed became one of the most read investigative pieces of the year. It wasn't just a crime story. It was a cautionary tale, a reminder that evil can hide behind even the most trusted faces. Emily received offers from big news outlets, but she turned them all down. Willow Creek was home now. She had found her place. One morning as she walked through the town square, she passed the new sheriff, a young woman who had taken over after Daniel's arrest. Morning, Emily, the sheriff greeted. Emily smiled. Morning. The town was different now, wiser, more cautious. But it was healing. As Emily walked past the memorial, she paused for a moment, her fingers brushing over Lila's name. I won't let them forget you, she whispered. And with that, she walked on, ready for whatever story came next. This story is more than a tale of crime and punishment. It's a warning. Power in the wrong hands is dangerous. Trust, once broken, leaves scars that never fully heal. So who do you trust? And more importantly, how do you now they deserve it? If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Stay tuned for more stories that expose the hidden truths we need to confront. Until next time, stay safe and stay vigilant.